things are associated with that. All right, what else do you want to talk about? Pick a subject.
Stay on the subject of business integrity and reputation.
Okay.
I really love your approach on the reputation, on starting at the top. I've never actually heard that articulated that way.
Well, now, if you're a business leader, you know, the CEO and the board of directors are responsible for enhancing the value of the company. If you do activities that detracts from the value of the company, the board of directors and the investors lose faith in you. And it's not so much, I hate you, Bob, or Chuck, and I'm just making up a name, so I don't know who you are, and I don't want to embarrass you. It is Bob.
They're all going to know it later.
Oh, okay. I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But people who bought stock in Target, for example, after the breach, they lost confidence in, A, I'm not going to use my credit card there anymore. If I buy anything, it's going to be cash, and how many of us use cash for all of our purchases? And if I'm a stockholder, I'm going to get rid of the stock before it drops even more. Now, you don't want to follow my lead as a stock investor. If I buy something, you sell it. If I sell something, you buy it. Because everything I do turns out wrong in the stock market. But people who follow that closely, you know, and say, I don't want to do business with Target, and they mean it, and they cut out all of that. Now, what happened as a result of the break-in at Target, which they ignored? They had all kinds of warning signs. They kept saying, well, the noise level is not enough. The noise level is not enough. We'll ignore it. And they had the hack, and they lost all of that information. Who else lost? The CEO, the CISO, tremendous fines, and they said, oh, well, most of this is covered by cyber insurance. Yeah, who believes in the tooth fairy still? The insurance companies are in business to make money, not to pay for losses. They're in the business to collect premiums. And cyber insurance companies are doing a great job doing that. So that's absolutely bizarre. Okay, does that answer your question?
It does, and I like your approach on that a lot.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit now about my experience at DHS. I had an opportunity to go down and run a special program that was approved by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security and the Director of NSA. The NSA Chief of Staff called me and said, Rich, we would like you to run this program. Yes, ma'am. I used to work for her, and I had tremendous respect for her, and I knew that if she asked me to do something, I certainly would do it. I mean, you know, we're all loyal to our employees. And these are the words that she shared with me that have been burned into my soul ever since. What do you think those words would be? What would compel you to do that? We want you to succeed. Isn't that inspirational? As opposed to, don't screw this up. How many of us get from our bosses, this is important, don't screw it up, although they normally use another word. But when she said, we want you to succeed, I went, wow, that's awesome. So I go down and I realize I have a hollow organization, meaning I don't have the staff that I was promised. And I talked to the personnel person and they said, oh, well, you have to grow your staff. And I said, I'm an old guy. I won't live long enough to bring these people in to do the job that we need to do in the time frame in which we need to do it. And I said, here's what I need. So I had to rewrite all of the position descriptions and go to other government entities and literally steal people. I encouraged them to come and work for us. And they did. It was great. I had 32 people who were under the age of 30 who had master's degrees in computer science. It was absolutely awesome. And one of the individuals that I needed had a special talent. And I went to Debbie at NSA and I said, I need this NSA person. She said she'll be down there tomorrow. She delivered what she said she would do. We want you to succeed. Every check you write will clear. That is a very empowering environment in which to work. So I had tremendous support from my leadership at NSA. Tremendous suspicion from everyone at DHS because they thought I was a spy from NSA. And after having been down there a few months, everybody at NSA thought I had gone native because I was in love with the mission that we were doing. But I would do it again in a heartbeat. And one of the things that I thought was kind of fun was working with these young folks is realizing that Washington is a very expensive area. So most of them couldn't afford to live within a reasonable commuting distance. So it took them an hour and a half to 2 hours every day to come to work, an hour and a half to 2 hours to go home. And I found that many of them after work would go to the local bar so they could avoid a lot of traffic. I wanted them to go and be healthy, go to the gym, right? And so I called them in mass and I said, all right, guys and gals, here's what I'm gonna propose. How many of you would only like to come to work 3 days a week? Shockingly, they all raised their hands. And I said, here's the deal. You have to be here Monday and Tuesday, because otherwise it looks like you're taking a 3-day weekend or a 4-day weekend. But decide amongst yourselves who gets Monday, Tuesday, who's Wednesday, who's Thursday. Let me know. You sort it out for your schedule. It doesn't have to be set in stone. We can be flexible. We're an agile organization. But you have to work when you're at home. And the first one of you who lets me down, remember the first grade? All of you get punished. So it was a self-enforcing mechanism, and it worked. The second issue had to do with, we don't like BlackBerries, and we don't like government computers. Can we use our smartphones and our iPads? You're a security dude, what do you say?
I wouldn't want to do it.
Why not?
I wouldn't.
Where's your boldness? Where's your sense of adventure? That's right, give me some time to mull this over. And then I talked to my friends at NSA who were kind of specialized in certain activities. And I said, you know, President Obama has a BlackBerry
That's what it's saying.
that's special. All of you know that, right? You know why it was special? We made it special. Only for him, one of. It's now been disclosed, and I can say it openly now, that the Secretary of State at that time wanted the same BlackBerry. And President Obama said, no, I'm the only one that has a BlackBerry with this capability. Yes, sir, we understand. We didn't ask the question the second time. So I'm thinking, why don't we do something for the smartphones? We're not doing something magic for the BlackBerries to protect classified information, because I said you can't use classified information except when you're in the building. But for smartphones and iPads, let's use a truncated system, which is now in a lot of Androids. It's called Fort Knox, where they take private emails and send them into one portion of your system, and government emails or business emails and put them in another portion. And I had that put on all of their systems. I said, if you let me put in an added feature to your phones and your iPads, and you sign a waiver saying I can look at your content anytime I want to. Hey, Apple, are you listening? If I can do this anytime I want to, we can work together. And guess what they said? Unanimity. They all loved it. You don't believe me, do you?
Where I work, if I take on, I work as a contractor.
Okay, I can't hear, so
I
I'm
work
gonna come.
as a contractor up there, and if I even send an email from my own personal laptop, it becomes property of the government.
Correct. You're correct. Keep that in mind, because that's gonna play a part in the coming issues in the political system.
Very
I
much so.
shouldn't say anything more than that. But you're absolutely right. And the IG for the Department of Homeland Security has said, anytime you use our system, whether it's for public, you shouldn't be using it for private email. But if you're using a government system for private email, and here's the distinction. It was not a government system. It was a system personally owned by my employees, by my teammates.
Yeah, I own the laptop.
Yeah.
So the email comes to my government address, say for this seminar, if I forward it to my person, Google, Gmail, I have now sent something from a government email to my personal email that becomes a property of the government. It's all totally unclassified. At least that's the threat that's being
Well,
made.
and that's because of the public records requirement.
I don't know, I just.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting and accurate observation. So anyway, we're getting well,
Okay.
it's a good question, a good comment. But it was just a very fascinating exercise to do all of that. It was a tremendous amount of fun. Now, here's what you should be thinking about. Remember, we're not going to talk about cybersecurity. We're going to talk about protecting digital assets. Why do you need to protect your digital assets? Number one, because of where you are and because of what you do, you're a target of opportunity. You're the low-hanging fruit, as it were. The Chinese are interested in you. The Russians are interested in you. The Brazilians are interested in you. The Romanians are interested in you. And I can name 7 other countries that are equally interested in what you're doing. And you're saying, no, they're not. Nobody really cares about what I do. And the answer is, of course they do. And you'll say, well, they can't get to me anyway because we're so well protected. Well, maybe you are. But what about those that you connect with? Oh, I don't know how well protected they are. So the mere fact that you're using your personal computer to communicate with a government system, you're exposing that government system to any vulnerabilities you have in your personal computer. You're aware of that, but you're saying, I don't have any vulnerabilities, I'm not worried because I use the latest virus detection system and I'm cool. And maybe that's true, but you don't know that for a fact with everyone you're communicating with. Yes, sir.
But the Chinese often use parts and pieces from different emails, from different sources to create a picture.
A mosaic, yes.
Mosaic, so it may not be exactly my email, but it's a piece of my email that they can combine to something else.
Exactly, exactly. You should be up here on stage with me. I mean, you're making my point. I love this. I love this. No, the mosaic, there is a real problem. And just like water holding, which is not waterboarding, but water holding refers to the fact that animals in the wild tend to make peace with each other when they're drinking water. You know, you have lions and tigers and bears alike drinking water together, kind of like people in a bar. They get along for a while. Then after their thirst is quenched, they go off and kill each other. So a lot of people will go looking at various sites of interest. I'm going to share something with you that's going to shock you. Normally it's a porn site or a dating site. And the bad guy, why are you nodding your head so?
Believe that wholeheartedly.
And what they'll do is they'll say, and I won't pick on you because you are blushing and I don't want to. I'll pick on you, how's that? And you'll say, well, I just was interested to see what would happen. And the bad guys are getting your personal data, they're getting your email. And they'll say, okay, I know who she works with because I get email, I've seen the email trail. So they'll send an email to your boss pretending to be you and say, boss, here's an interesting article you should read. And then he clicks on it, and then he or she is owned by the bad guys. That's the result of the water holding.
That's also Forbes.
Sorry?
So it's not just porn sites. Forbes.com had that exact same type of attack
Yeah.
a year ago. You went to go look at a cybersecurity article on Forbes, and they were using a water hole.
And you'd be surprised at how many people, particularly senior people, that fall for that. It's absolutely shocking. How many of you do business with Chase? Periodically, like every month, I get an email from Chase saying you need to we're putting in a new security application, you need to update the security features of your account. It's somebody trying to steal my information. So I send it to support@chase.com, I think it is. And then they send me an email back saying, no, we didn't send that, please ignore it. Now, one of the ways you can tell whether it's from Chase or not is to look at the header, who sent you the email. And if you open it up and it says Chase, it may very well be them, but probably it's Thelma Goodbody at wearerisky.com. I'm making a name up. Okay? And they're trying to seduce you. We'll continue that analogy since that seems to be fascinating everyone. Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Don't be insulted if I say yes, ma'am, because it's part of my culture.
no, I have 20 years in the Air Force, so, you know, I'm I'm used to it.
Oh, you're used to being picked on?
No, I'm used to being, called ma'am.
Oh, okay,
So,
good,
one of the things that, I mean, so you're talking to small business people.
yes.
So one question is what type of people should we, what type of skills should we be recruiting?
Oh, gosh. Number one, bright people. Now, I know that sounds silly, but when I was staffing my office, I was talking to one of my colleagues who I happened to be having a relationship with at the time, and she said, well, of course, hire smart people. People smarter than you. And I said, that makes sense. And she said, and it shouldn't be that hard. So,
Well, the qualifier just requires a giggle.
yeah. So hire smart people and train them.
Okay.
All right. Now, when I say smart people, there's a difference between being smart and very well educated.
No, I understand.
Okay. Well, not everybody does. For example, there was this code that was developed allegedly by NSA and allegedly by Israel. It went into Iranian subterfuges and did some dastardly deeds. You remember that?
Mhm.
And everyone said you had to be a PhD to do it. It was reverse engineered by a guy with a GED who lived in his mother's basement, ate Twinkies and drank Mountain Dew. I met the guy when I was speaking at Black Hat and well, not at RSA, but Black Hat at DEF CON. Phenomenal guy. So you don't need well-educated people, you need smart people that you can train. And the fundamentals are pretty clear. You know, don't open emails from sources that you're not familiar with, among other things. I mean, there's a host of other steps you can go through.
Well, yeah, but this is more than just, when it comes down to, people who can think strategically about what it means to preserve the integrity of your data, like what information should be withheld, what information should be
Okay,
shared.
I'm assuming you're in a supervisory position, are you not?
I am a small business, I'm founding a small business, so, and one of the things that.
Well, if you're running a small business, you're in charge.
Well, sure.
Yeah, and you're responsible. It's your leadership role to make sure your folks that work for you don't screw up.
Well, but I'm concerned about more things than just about email. I mean, we've got,
You should be.
we're on the presence of having a few communities in the area basically becoming smart communities.
Okay.
So Wilmington, Yellow Springs, the Columbus area is already doing a lot of this, but
All
they're.
right, let me give you 4 or 5 general pointers that will help you, and then if we need to drill down, we will.
Right.
Okay? Number one,
So
realize.
hard memory type of stuff.
Excuse me?
Hard memory is one of the things that skill sets that we know that we need.
Realize that you are a target of opportunity for the adversary. You're a target. You are in an environment, a neighborhood, as it were, that's dangerous.
Right.
Okay? Accept that as the truth, because it's true. So,
And you make yourself a target by having high.
by breathing,
Well, and the
by being
higher,
in Dayton, Ohio.
the higher quality your telecommunication systems, the more of a target you may be.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Okay,
I know that sounds strange.
well, so what inoculates you?
Well, you know, I will hear people say, I'm a small business, I'm not doing that much, I'm not a target. Okay, let's talk about that. Now, picture this if you would. I'm speaking to 50 individuals who run family funds. A
Okay.
family fund is a financial entity, usually 4 or 5 people, who manage funds for a very wealthy family whose net value is more than $1 billion.
Right.
And several of them were still using Windows 95 computers. I hope you're not one of those.
No.
Okay. Some of them were using the predecessor to Windows 7, not realizing it was no longer supported, as if that was not a problem. So my point is, number one, you're a target. Number two, you're in a very threatening environment. There are a lot of threat actors out there. They're out to get you one way or the other, whether it's they're trying to steal your intellectual property, or whether they're looking at it for financial gain, or whether they're trying to go into your system to ping into somebody's system that you're working with.
Right.
You know, the lily pad effect, exploiting the trusted relationship. And that's a very valuable concept to worry about. So you need to think about those things. You also need to think about, what are my vulnerabilities with a big V?
Right.
How are my systems vulnerable from a technical standpoint and from a personnel standpoint?
Okay.
Do you patch your system? You have a system that says, I make sure my patches are current. And the answer, and I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I will bet you a business card that the answer is, you don't know whether your systems are
We'll
current.
probably be happy.
No, you are behind.
Yeah.
Everybody's behind. Because it's not a top priority. The top priority for the person who handles your IT system is to make sure it's working today.
Right.
Not that it's going to continue to be working tomorrow, like putting in the patches. And guess who else gets the patch announcements, other than those who are clients of Microsoft?
We're even concerning ourselves with the capacity, is that what systems do we have that are under capacity that could be exploited?
All of them.
Yeah. Well, certainly anything that's under capacity.
Anything that's connected to the internet
Right.
is vulnerable to exploitation.
And some that are not,
Say again?
and some that are not.
Anything that is connected to the internet is vulnerable to exploitation,
And some that are not.
such as.
You do not have to be connected to the internet directly.
My caveat
Oh,
was, if you
yeah.
are connected to the
Oh, it's
internet.
definitely, okay, you're right. You definitely,
Of course I
well, you
am.
said anything that's connected, and I said, and some that are not. You do not have to be connected to the internet to be vulnerable.
All right, this is a true story. You're
And
not
my
going to believe,
friends-
no, I agree with you. Now, this is
Coming
true.
from an old SIGINT guy, you do not have to be connected to a piece of wire to be vulnerable.
Well, if we're talking about your computer systems, you are connected to the internet one way or the other. Even if you're sneakernet,
Right.
there's a potential vulnerability. How many of you remember Windows 95? Did you look at the shrink wrap on the back, the one that was approved by NSA, and said, security goodness?
That's why they were allowed to even join Jot's system.
Let me tell you the background of that, and I was part of that solution. This was Mike McConnell, who was the director of NSA at the time. And we were involved in this wonderful program called the Orange Book, the Rainbow Series, where NSA would evaluate a commercial product and say, we can make it stronger if you do the following things, and we'll bear the cost of doing the evaluation, but you, the vendor, the developer, bear the cost of improving it. But that didn't work so well because it took us anywhere from 12 to 15 months to do the improvement. And the technology was changing so quickly that by the time we finished that version, the next version came out and it was just all screwy. But Microsoft came in and said, we really want you to look very closely at Windows 95 and help us make it more secure. And we went back and forth with them, and finally they said, this is as much as we're going to do. We're not going to get an ROI, return on investment, if we do everything you ask us to do. So this is as good as it gets. And we want you to please, oh please, say it's good. So we designed a little NSA InfoSec Eagle, which you may remember if you collected the shrink wrap, and said, this system is secure in a standalone configuration. People loved it. Because all they did was see the little image. This system is secure, and they quit reading.
Yeah.
They forgot that it's a standalone configuration. So anything that's connected directly or indirectly to the internet is vulnerable. So if you've got a printer, your printer is connected to the internet, and your printer has a capability of letting the developer, the manufacturer, know when it needs maintenance. What other information goes to China from your printer, from your Xerox machine? Think about that. Okay? All right, so what did we talk about? We're at the point where we're worried about the threat environment, the threat actors, the fact that you're vulnerable, and then you need to identify what you want to protect. What are your valuable assets? Because I'm going to protect this a lot more than I'm going to protect this. This has more information on it. That's a bad example. I'm going to protect this a lot better than I'm going to protect a Coca-Cola can.
I didn't know that. The other one's a little more intimate.
That's almost empty, but I'll sell it to you. Okay? So correct the vulnerabilities, figure out what's most important to you. Don't spend a lot of money protecting stuff that's not worth it. You don't spend $50 to protect a dollar, but you spend $100 to protect $150, for example. And the other thing that you should do, your next step when you get back to your office is, what is the worst thing that can happen to me? And realize what that is and plan backwards. How can I mitigate that digital disruption? And what could I have done to prevent it? And if you follow those handful of steps, you'll be in a much better position than you currently are.
I feel pretty good about the expertise that we have at the local data set, the local data center that we're going to be using. So I feel good about that, but again, it's kind of like, if you had a list of, okay, if you go to your data center and they
And it's a repetitive list. It's an endless circle. It's a doodle loop. Observe, decide, act. I mean, you're familiar with that.
Well,
And never think the job is done. It's like, and I'm going to be slightly sexist here, but I'm going to do it out of great respect. Kind of like being a mother. Your job is never done, right?
right.
If you're a single dad, your job is never done either, but that's another subject for another time. But think about that. Your job is never done. You've always got to be thinking about it. And sometimes I get a question, well, gosh, Rich, do you worry about things? And I said, no, I sleep like a baby, and I wish you could sleep like a baby. Every 2 hours, I wake up crying. I'm worried about what's going on. Constantly. Yes, sir.
Let me just kind of pose a question to you, and maybe you can kind of fill some things in. We generally know where we are today, individually, as a country, as a business unit, or whatever. We're either paying attention to that or we're not. We're doing the best we can. Where do you anticipate this is going in the future? Are we at a national level trying to do something? The Mac has fewer vulnerabilities than the PC. Are we looking at trying to change users over into a more secure environment? What are we trying to do to protect the country from serious cyber attacks? Where are we today? What do we need to do in the future?
Okay, great question. We didn't plant this. I haven't
No.
talked to you before.
No.
That's a good way to summarize what I'm trying to say. If you think about a missile coming to this country,
That's a pretty good
who's in
example,
charge? Let's just say the Air Force, because that was the service I was in, and I think they're the very best. So they're going to protect us from that. At least I'm open about it. Okay. They're going to protect us from that missile coming in. But what about that cyber attack that's coming from somewhere? Well, the government's going to say, as they have said, it's not our responsibility to protect you against a criminal activity, because we don't know that it's not a criminal activity until we have enough information to show that it's state-sponsored. And even if it's state-sponsored, we're going to issue a demarche. We're going to tell them to stop. Now, how effective is that? It's like drawing another line in the sand.
Sure.
Nobody gives a rat's fur coat. They're going to continue to do that. And the awkward part is we do the same thing. We have hackers in this country that attack other systems just because they're criminals and perverts and thieves and everything else that's bad. So what's the solution? Number one, accept the fact that your government is not going to help you. And the reason the government is not going to help you is not because the government doesn't care. The government's hands are tied legally.
Right.
NSA has a capability, as do other entities, of detecting attacks coming in and can warn the victim in real time. But the problem with that is NSA is not authorized by law to provide that information to victims, even if it affects the banking system. Now, if they're attacking a government site, like an Air Force site or a Navy site, they can share that information with them, but it's not a priority for NSA because their job is to protect, not to protect, but to provide intelligence information to the decision makers, not necessarily to protect banks on an Air Force base, for example. Moonlight Maze being a good example of that, and you need to Google that. I can talk to you about it for 30 minutes, but it's not really necessary to to make my particular point. So you have to realize this is your responsibility to take care of it. And there are a number of things that you can do. And you're gonna say, okay, Rich, tell us what we can do, other than what I've already told you. Number one, go to your service provider and say, I don't want anything bad coming into my system. Have any of you done that? All right, do it. See what they say. I talked to Verizon, I talked to Comcast, and they said, well, we can't do that because that would be interfering with people's traffic. And I said, oh, that means you make money on bulk traffic, and you're not interested in protecting me. And I said, look at it this way, and you're gonna love this example. I have hot and cold running water in my house. My water comes from a water company that's owned by a government entity. Right now, I don't have, because of where I live, I don't have to worry about the purity of the water. So I don't have to run a separate test to make sure the water that comes into my house is pure. I buy electricity from a company called Baltimore Gas and Electric. That electricity comes in at a certain magnitude. I don't have to measure it as it comes into my house to make sure it's that degree of purity. So my point is, why should I have to depend on, why can't I depend on Comcast or Verizon to make sure that the electrons coming into my house are safe? And Comcast says, well, Rich, we're in sympathy with what you're doing. We're giving you for free the viral detection system. Okay, but I can only get it if I'm your customer and pay each month. It ain't free, folks. And that doesn't, viral detection systems don't work all that well.
And it only works on certain systems. And it only works on certain systems.
Exactly, exactly.
But you have a major, and I love where you're going, but you have two regulated industries, well, one regulated industry, because the two examples you use were public utilities, and you have a non-regulated industry.
Well, it's non-regulated now, but in 4 years it will be, or 3 years, or 2 years, depending on which pundit that you're listening to.
Well, people are kind of finding it out, but, I mean, there's, the people are kind of like saying, well, eventually people are gonna be talking about, do we really want Google and YouTube to be the main search engines? And,
Well, now you're starting to sound like my daughter, and I say that with tremendous respect because I think the world of my daughter.
well,
She's on.
because this is not just about protecting, integrity, it's about protecting intellectual property. And,
Did you see 60 Minutes last month?
oh, well, yeah, I've watched a lot of media on this.
Okay, the 60 Minutes show on the theft of intellectual property by the Chinese.
Mhm.
My team wrote that.
Yeah.
We didn't get any credit for it. Dimitri of CrowdStrike was a primary spokesperson and an FBI guy. That's okay because we got the message out. That's all we were interested in doing.
Oh, but you got companies like LinkedIn and Google who are very happy to try and figure out how you're collecting together a series of, well, I was asking you about what skill sets. Okay, so I'm collecting a bunch of skill sets because I'm preparing to put together this product. Is that how much visibility do I want to have on that? At AFIT, one of the things that we're working on is we're working on technology to protect people, to protect, the way that you do searches, to protect yourself from getting profiled in such a way that people can, identify your cyber presence.
And how much privacy do you have when you're trying to buy an airline ticket? You go and you search for an airline ticket, you get a schedule, you get a price, and you say, well, I'll think about it.
Yeah.
And a little bit later, you come back, well, I think I'll buy that, and you go on there and the price has gone up. Every time you go back to that site, price has gone up a little bit, because they know what you were looking for, and they figure they can gouge you a little bit more.
That's what you're doing.
No.
All right, what else can you do? What else can you do?
And that's why you don't use a Mac.
That's also why we get.
Supply chain risk management. How many of you are concerned about supply chain?
That you were on it. You were just on it a second ago, because that piece that 60 Minutes did, and I kudos on your team, because it really came down to the weakest link along that chain,
It always does.
and that was a supply
It
chain
always does.
issue.
Have you ever been in a bar fight?
Yeah, a couple
No,
times.
not a little bit.
Let me tell you how bar fights happen. The bad guy doesn't go after the big guy. The bad guy goes after the little guy.
He goes after the weakest guy. He may
No,
not
no,
be
no,
the-
not necessarily, no. You don't know who's weak or strong. You always go by size. Believe me, I've been in, that's another story. But yeah, supply chain risk management is very critical. And I'm having a conversation on the 10th of this month at a dinner with Andre, who's the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Small Businesses, along with 20 of his closest friends. And his commentary was, not only are the Chinese stealing our intellectual property, not only, thank you very much.
I really enjoyed the
Thank you.
discussion there.
All right, let me give you a card and you stay in touch.
I will.
I'm gonna give you one of my cards, rather than somebody else.
Enjoy.
Andre was talking about the fact that not only are the Chinese stealing our intellectual property, and he was saying this in public, DOD, which I thought was rather commendable. The other thing he said is they're buying our suppliers, not just in China, but here in the United States. And what they will frequently do, and this is why you need to be concerned here in Dayton, is they will use a cutout to make the purchase. It'll look like a U.S. company, but it's actually the Chinese that are coming in and buying. So if you get an outrageously high price for the startup that you've just done, do a lot of due diligence, because it may be you're selling the capability to the Chinese and you're thinking, well, I'm just a low-end supplier, I'm not that big of a person. But then they'll have access to your computers and they can exploit your trusted relationship with the others that you have a business relationship with, and that's part of the way they get in and steal stuff. Did I answer your question?
To a degree, but let me,
To a
let
degree.
me kind of expand on what I said. We've got the opportunity to take care of that issue today with a service provider that will provide a very high level of security of what's going through. Once you know what that target looks like, once somebody's identified it,
Yeah.
or there's a way to look at it, if you can shut that stream down, then what's the next step? Where would we go from
Well,
there?
I'm
I
gonna
mean,
ask-
other than take it to
Now, I'm gonna
other
ask a
parts of the
technical question,
US.
Art. Is the service provider acting as a glorified filter for virus
Yes.
offense? Or are they looking behind the address group of the ones and zeros to see whether or
Well,
not it has malware?
All right, that's once they identify it, once they know who the sender is, then somehow this country has to dealing with that responsible individual.
Well, I'll tell you up front, if you've got a system like that that works with 95+% degree of
Right.
accuracy and comfort, charge more, customers will buy it, particularly in the defense
Right,
industry.
right.
And then the more people buy it, then it'll trickle, that's not a good word, but other people will be interested in getting that, and then the price can
Right.
become lower
So
because
who's,
you've got a broader.
who's my main point of contact? Once I identify who the sender is of whatever that's a threat to an individual or whatever here in the US, do I take that to Homeland Security? FBI doesn't have time to do anything. NSA, it's outside of their responsibilities of
Let me
the
ask you,
US.
why do you want to do something about it other than keep them from coming in?
Knock it out, right. Either take that site down, or the typical thing that you do in a war or anything else is you develop a chaos theory. So
Yeah.
if you can interrupt the thing, then it's gonna slow that down, and you can
Well,
take.
the easiest thing to do legally is to keep them from coming in.
Right.
You can get value added by selling that service
Right,
to a customer.
right,
The second issue of you want to eliminate them, strike back.
correct.
That becomes a legal issue that you don't want to get involved with, because it's expensive and time consuming and fraught with a lot of political peril. How
But
do you
isn't
know
that,
that what
isn't
you're
that the
shutting down?
government's, isn't that the government's place? Once they're put on notice or that entity is identified? No.
They'll never touch it in today's environment.
Then-
The FBI, Secret Service, and Microsoft worked together for 2.5 years to shut down a bunch of sites that were spewing malware.
Mhm.
They finally were able to shut them down, and they just moved somewhere else.
Right.
Does that answer your question a little better?
There's a big void.
Yeah, listen, there's an opportunity for money there. If you need somebody to help you with that, I'm the guy. No, I'm not soliciting, I'm just. okay,
Appreciate
that's
it.
That's not my role here. Questions? Everybody's folded their bags, so it must be time to go home. Either that or the bar just opened. Here's your chance to ask questions. Okay?
So, one last question, follow up on
Never
this,
say
since
that.
everybody in this room probably
Never-
has some sort of
never say
vendor
one last
relationship.
question.
So what do you do to ensure that the people that are supporting you have something in place to protect you along that supply chain?
Okay, I told you early on I'm a lawyer.
You're talking to one, so
I told you early on that I'm a recovering attorney,
that's what we are, recovering attorneys.
but I also am actively engaged in protecting my assets.
That's right.
So when I sign up with somebody who supplies me with something, I have them sign a liability clause that says if something goes wrong, it's their fault, and also include a confessed judgment claim in there.
That's it?
Yeah, and they'll say, that's a lot that you want me to do. And I said, you're right. But you're so convinced that the system you're selling me, the box that you're selling me, is so good, I shouldn't have to worry about it. If you're making the warranty, if you're making the representation, then you should stand by it. And if you don't, then there's a confessed judgment clause. And I said, well, gosh, that puts the risk on us. I said, of course, and I'm willing to pay a little bit extra. How many of you use a cloud?
Oh, yeah, usually.
How many of you have looked at the service agreement you have with the cloud provider? Don't. It will scare you.
Yeah.
Because they will tell you, their sales rep will say, as far as I know, your system, your information is protected. We'll stand by it. But if you look at the service agreement, once it's commingled in the cloud, they shift that responsibility to you to make sure, A, it was properly encrypted before it left your control, and then it remained encrypted. And how many of you can make that guarantee? There are three things that make a system secure, an encryption system secure. And those three things are, you've got to have an amazing cryptography. AES 256 is the one of choice because it's scalable. The second thing you need is to make sure it's implemented properly. And that's very difficult to do. You don't just plug and pray. You put it in and make sure it's installed properly, that it works under all conditions. The third thing you need to look for is a true random number generator. And all of you are looking at is like I just got off of a tree. There are pseudo random number generators that most entities use in this country, but hardly anyone takes the time to use a true random number generator. A random number generator will result as if it's a one-time pad. A one-time pad is, I'm using this encryption system only this one time, and after that, I'll never use it again. And one of the easiest ways, not that it's easy to crack into a system, but if you can get to the random number generator and realize that it's not, that it's just pseudo-random, over time, you can hack into that system. Now, it takes a lot of man years or person years to do that, but if you're using a high-speed computer, as some entities have and use, then it's doable. Does that make you feel comfortable now?
Yeah, but not enough.
Huh?
Yeah, but not enough. Because
Okay.
if,
Thank you for coming.
if it's still been exploited and there was that reasonableness level by just saying,
Okay,
okay.
look, there's no such thing as perfect security. There's no such thing as perfect romance. You have to take a certain risk in life. But what you want to do is shift the risk, the liability to someone else as a lawyer. As a business person, you want to have that predictability. I want to know to the extent feasible that my systems are whatever. And I'm imposing that obligation on you, and I'm willing to pay a little bit more. But just to save me a lot of hassle, I want a confessed judgment clause. And use New York law or Delaware law in your corporation, because they're more favorable to business. And I'm giving you a lot of free legal advice. And I'm not authorized to practice law here in Dayton. So we're just having a conversation.
Yeah, Kentucky, you would have been violating their professional responsibilities by sharing your knowledge.
All right,
Rich, I got a question for you.
good.
What state do you think does the best job of protecting their cyber assets, to include industry within that state?
What state, as in one of the 50 in the
Yeah,
United States?
that's in Ohio. If you read in the news, you always hear about state XYZ has got a cyber initiative, and Ohio does the same. I just read an article this morning on Colorado.
Well, I'm going to use a legal phrase, which you're going to enjoy. It's called puffery. It's normally associated with used car salesmen. They make representations that they believe to be true, but there's not necessarily any basis in fact.
Some of the initiatives I've seen are the states are looking at using the
You
National
tell me
Guard.
what state helps you protect your system? Does Ohio help you protect your system?
They're looking at it.
They're looking at it. Okay, different question.
Yeah, and I was wondering if there's a state that does it now.
To my knowledge, there is no state, just like there's no federal entity that does that. And so, as I said several times earlier, and I'm not trying to be obnoxious, but it's your responsibility to make sure your systems are pure, that are protected. You can shift the liability, but you can't shift the responsibility. And I can tell you, I doubt seriously, and I'm speaking hypothetically here, that any attorney general would tell a state governor that you are on legal grounds to protect everyone's system and not worry about liability exposure. In this hypothetical, I would advise against it. And I think my two,
I can't think of any state that, the only one that would come close is Nevada, because back in the early 90s, they started looking at what the gaming industry was
goes to
doing.
mafia. Oops, didn't mean to say that.
No, sir, you know, but
I'm looking at it from the perspective of an inducement to do business within a state.
It's a different issue. There are some states that are more attractive to do business in. For
In a
example, Virginia.
cybersecurity realm,
Yeah, I would much rather do business in Virginia than in Maryland. It has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with what is the business environment. The business environment in Virginia is much more favorable to the business person than is Maryland. There are other states we can make some comparisons to as well, but if you're just focusing on cybersecurity, which is a phrase I don't like, but is a state going to help me protect my digital assets? I don't think any state is in a position to say they can or they will. But if I'm trying to protect my systems and I'm shifting the liability to someone else, I want to be in a legal environment that is pro-business. And that's why I'm saying Virginia as opposed to Maryland. And there are other examples that can be used as well, but those two I'm familiar with.
The odds are they're making that representation knowing they have sovereign immunity as well. I mean, even if they're making that representation, the odds that you can go back against them are pretty slim.
But in certain commercial transactions, and I don't know about Ohio, for example, but in certain commercial transactions, if the state is involved in a commercial transaction, there's an implied waiver of sovereign immunity. And we can discuss this all night long, but, I mean, for your point, the onus is on you.
yeah, I got that.
Okay, I'm sorry to beat you about the head, neck, and shoulders with a lead-filled walking stick, but, you know, I get very uncomfortable when people say it's the government that's gonna help me. And I will close with this. Thank you very much for coming.
You got a card?
Sure. Oh, you want one?
Sure.
Okay, I'll give you one of mine. Instead of someone else.
send you one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn.
All right.
All right, here's kind of the summary of the government, you know. The government is running a golf shop. I'm on the golf course, and I want a little token so I can mark my ball. They're called ball markers. So I go to the golf shop that's run by the government. I say, I'd like to buy a ball marker. They said, fine, that'll be 90 cents. I can afford that. I pull out $1. I give them $1. They give me a dime back in change. And I ask, where's my ball marker? It's the dime. Think about it.
I got it.
I used to be in the belly of the beast. It has a digestive problem. All right, anything else? Yeah, here for your benefit.